P. Diddy's arrest and fall from grace sent shockwaves across the country after the once beloved music artist was indicted on federal charges. But experts say more charges could be on the way for those closest to Diddy, after they helped facilitate his alleged sex trafficking ring for more than a decade. So what would all that look like? And could some of Diddy's associates avoid federal charges if they betray Diddy and testify for the prosecution? We'll hear from former federal prosecutor Nima Rahmani about all that and more. I'm Gillespie, and this is Law & Crime News. After months of anticipation, 54-year-old Sean Diddy Combs has finally been arrested, indicted on federal charges of racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution. Diddy was indicted by a grand jury in mid-September and taken into custody at a Manhattan hotel. After that, he was booked in Brooklyn's Metropolitan Detention Center. He's been denied bail twice, a federal judge ruling that's where Diddy will remain as he awaits trial. Diddy has denied all the allegations and pleaded not guilty to the charges. And according to his defense attorney, Diddy is eager to take the stand when it comes time for trial to tell his side of the story. It remains to be seen if Diddy will actually testify, but we can almost certainly expect bombshell testimony from some of Diddy's accusers, like Cassandra Ventura. You probably know her as the singer Cassie. She filed civil suit against Diddy last November, claiming that over the course of their years-long relationship, Diddy physically, verbally, and sexually assaulted her. Cassie also alleged Diddy forced her to have sex with prostitutes, and oftentimes he'd record this. Rodney Jones, also known as the producer Lil Rod, said the same thing when he filed suit against Diddy back in February. He also alleged there were hundreds of hours of video showing Diddy and others participating in some seriously illegal activity. The indictment highlights this, saying federal investigators collected incriminating digital evidence from Diddy's homes while performing raids back in March. This evidence allegedly shows something referred to as freak-offs, which were elaborate and produced sex performances that Combs arranged, directed, masturbated during, and often electronically recorded. The indictment goes on to say, quote, members and associates of the Combs enterprise, including high-ranking supervisors, security staff, household staff, personal assistants, and other Combs business employees, facilitated the freak-offs by, among other things, booking hotel rooms for the freak-offs, stocking the hotel rooms in advance with the required freak-off supplies, including controlled substances, baby oil, lubricant, extra linens, and lighting, cleaning the hotel rooms after the freak-offs to try to mitigate room damage, arranging for travel for victims, commercial sex workers, and Combs to and from freak-offs, resupplying Combs with requested supplies, delivering large sums of cash to Combs to pay the commercial sex workers, and scheduling the delivery of IV fluids. In or about March 2024, during searches of Combs' residence in Miami, Florida, and Los Angeles, California, law enforcement seized various freak-off supplies, including narcotics and more than 1,000 bottles of baby oil and lubricant. So according to federal prosecutors, Diddy's associates and members of the so-called Combs enterprise are the ones who helped arrange for these illegal freak-offs. The indictment goes on to say members and associates of the Combs enterprise enabled Combs' control over victims by following his directions regarding financial payments to the victims, advancing or suppressing the victims' career opportunities, and acquiring the controlled substances Combs used to keep the victims compliant. It also alleges these associates knew of Diddy's physical brutality to these survivors and would help Diddy conceal this by hiding these victims in hotel rooms waiting for their injuries to heal. At times, these associates allegedly tracked down any victims attempting to leave Diddy and then forced them to stay. Federal prosecutors allege these associates showed a willingness to conceal crimes and are guilty of a laundry list of crimes, including preserving, protecting, promoting, and enhancing the power of the Combs enterprise, including the power of its leader, Combs, through violence, use of firearms, threats of violence, coercion, and verbal, emotional, physical, and sexual abuse. What's interesting here is that no one is publicly named in the indictment except for Diddy. So while prosecutors allege Diddy had a team helping him carry out this illegal scheme, they don't call anyone out by name. But thanks to the civil suits filed before Diddy's arrest, we may have an idea of a few associates who were allegedly involved. Lil Rod's lawsuit specifically names Christina Coram, that's Diddy's chief of staff. The lawsuit straight up compares Coram to Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein's longtime companion, who was eventually convicted on multiple federal sex crimes. According to the lawsuit, Coram, or KK, required all staff, from butlers to Diddy's chef and Lil Rod, to carry around a fanny pack with drugs like cocaine, ecstasy, and marijuana gummies. The lawsuit reads, quote, "It was important to defendant Coram to have Mr. Combs's drug of choice immediately ready when he asked for it." Lil Rod also alleges Coram ordered sex workers and prostitutes for Diddy. Working under Coram, Lil Rod alleges there were other associates referred to as direct reports, including Moy Bond, Stevie J, Frankie Santella, and Brendan Paul. You may remember Brendan Paul's name because he was arrested at the Miami airport the same day the feds raided Diddy's homes. He was charged with cocaine and marijuana possession, but avoided any jail time with a plea deal that required him to enter a drug diversion program. But according to Lil Rod, Brendan Paul, quote, "works as Mr. Combs's mule. He acquires and distributes Mr. Combs' drugs and guns." Lil Rod also mentions another associate, Stevie J, who he says recruits sex workers and attends and participates in freak-offs. In this same group is Justin Combs, Diddy's son, and a co-defendant in Lil Rod's lawsuit. According to the suit, Justin Combs solicits prostitutes, underage girls, and sex workers would engage in freak-offs. There's also the allegation brought forward just this week that another high-profile celebrity was involved in this sex trafficking scheme, and their name is potentially bigger than Diddy's. There's a lot to break down here, so let's check in with former federal prosecutor Nima Rahmani. But right now, there's only Diddy. He's the only one who's been charged in relation to all this. Why is that?
It's surprising, Sierra. I expected others to be charged as well. There's really two categories of people: those that worked for Diddy, and we're talking about Christina Horam, his chief of staff, all the way on down. If they don't cooperate with prosecutors, they can absolutely be charged as co conspirators, and they can potentially be on the hook for the sex trafficking as well. But I think what really people care about are the other celebrities. And there are a lot of rumors out there, including recently, where one of the victim's lawyers said that he had viewed one of the pornographic videos, and there's someone who's participating in the sex acts that's even bigger than Diddy. So that's a pretty small universe of people that may be. Obviously, I haven't seen the video. I don't know if it's true or not. People are apparently trying to sell the tapes that Diddy made. So I think in the coming days and weeks, more names may come out, and then there may be pressure on prosecutors to start charging others as well.
So why wouldn't they have done it already?
There's really kind of two schools of thought when it comes to prosecuting cases. Sometimes the feds, they'll focus on the target of their investigation. Not to bring up other cases, but for instance, Jack Smith, how he's handled the Donald Trump case, just charged him. There's a prosecutor, district attorney in Atlanta that charged lots of people in the Trump case. Same thing with the Eric Adams indictment. He's the mayor of New York. He's been charged by the same office. Even though there's other alleged co-conspirators that participated in the bribes and the campaign finance violations, the office just charged Adams. And I think the strategy behind that is, if you end up charging a lot of people, obviously they're all going to have lawyers, whether they're privately retained or appointed. And that can really slow down the process because you're going to deal with more motions. And if the case actually goes all the way to trial, each witness that's examined, they may have to be subject to cross examination by lots of different defense lawyers.
I think a name that everybody's thinking about is Christina Coram, who's Diddy's chief of staff. And in Lil Rod's lawsuit, she was listed. There were photos comparing her to Ghislaine Maxwell, who was kind of a conspirator along with Jeffrey Epstein. So a pretty stark comparison there. Do you think that she would face charges potentially?
I think Christina Forum can face charges, and she's probably the person that is most likely to be cooperating with the feds right now because she has the most exposure. Obviously, Little Rod named her in his civil complaint, but she reportedly carried a fanny pack with the drugs that was provided to the sex workers. And she was apparently also, at least allegedly, involved in getting the sex workers to wherever Diddy was. Could have been New York, Miami, Atlanta, Los Angeles. So she was actively involved in his day to day life. And if that included the criminal enterprise as well, she's potentially in a world of trouble. And Diddy did call her his right hand man, his right hand woman. So she's someone that I think should be a high level target of the U.S. Attorney's Office.
You spoke about how prosecutors are likely talking to Christina Quorum. So I guess I'm wondering, is it possible that she would flip, so to speak, and she would testify against Diddy?
It's very likely that she's already flipped and already cooperating because, when it comes to these conspiracies, one of the things that's so powerful about charging a RICO or any type of conspiracy is that all the co-conspirators, they're criminally liable for the crimes that are committed on behalf of the conspiracy. So that's really important because Christina Joram, I don't believe that she actually partook in the sex trafficking, but if she helped bring the sex workers or provide them drugs or do these overt acts in furtherance of the conspiracy, she's actually liable for sex trafficking, even if she didn't have sex. So she has a lot of exposure and she's someone that would be an easy target to flip. And that's often when you're talking about a criminal organization. Obviously, Diddy had his legitimate businesses, but anyone could be street gang, mob, the cartel. It doesn't really matter. What you want to do is flip lower level people and get the target or the head of the organization. So Horam would be a very easy target, in my opinion, if she really did participate in these acts as alleged by Lil Rod and others.
In Lil Rod's lawsuit, that's really where we got an inside look to Diddy's relationship with Christina Quorum. And as you said, she was the right hand woman. So she knew all the goings on, the alleged goings on, and she was kind of privy to all of that. So, what would it take for prosecutors to kind of pull apart that relationship? She no longer would show any loyalty, so to speak, to Diddy.
So sometimes what you'll do as a prosecutor is do a reverse proffer. So a proffer is when a co-defendant or a witness they come and they provide information to prosecutors. A reverse is actually the opposite. They'll bring a target or a subject of an investigation into the office and they'll put the evidence out there, prosecutors will, and they'll show that defendant or that target or that subject or that witness, whoever it is, how screwed they are. And the conversation will be, this is going to go one of two ways. You're either going to tell us the truth and cooperate and testify before the grand jury and testify at trial, or you're going to be charged as a defendant in this case, and you may go to prison for a very long time. So the choice is yours. So I wouldn't be surprised if there was some sort of conversation like that with Horam and her lawyer. And most of the time, 9 times out of 10, that person ends up flipping to save themselves.
So we can almost guarantee that Christina Quorum is speaking with prosecutors or investigators, TBD, but we're going to guess that they are. What about Diddy's children, though? Some of them are listed as co-defendants in other civil suits. I keep going back to Lil Rod's, but that really was a bombshell lawsuit. Justin Combs is specifically mentioned in that one as having partook in these alleged freak-offs and actually not just facilitated them, but did have sex during them. So there's that one. Then there's also a civil suit against Christian Combs that he forced a woman to perform oral sex on him and Diddy facilitated it. So a lot of his kids have been named in separate suits. Do you think they could be speaking with investigators?
I think it's less likely that the children are going to roll on their father. Obviously, Combs is going to pay for their lawyers. He's got a lot of money to sort of protect them. The fact that they haven't been charged yet leads me to believe that that is less likely. It's certainly possible that family members could be charged, children, especially if they did participate in the sex acts. But usually, you're going to go after individuals that are much easier targets, like Christina Joram, other employees that have less of a familial relationship or reason to potentially stay silent and protect their father. But anything is possible. I mean, I've seen husbands testify against wives, children against their parents. So it's certainly possible, but less likely than the actual employees.
What about other co-defendants from different civil suits? So, for instance, Liza Gardner says that she was raped by Diddy in the 90s in New York, and she says Aaron Hall, a co-defendant in that suit, also raped her. Or Jane Doe alleges the same thing, but in 2003, and Harvey Pierre allegedly raped her. Could either of those people potentially face charges?
Potentially, yes. We've seen the civil lawsuits, and obviously you have someone like Christina Horm who does play that Ghislaine Maxwell recruiter role, right? Maybe groomer role, which is still a very important role when you were dealing with sex abuse or sex traffic. But there are lawsuits that specifically name others, security guards, other individuals, parts of Diddy's team that were actually physically involved in the sexual assault, whether restraining the victim or even participating in the sex acts themselves. So, absolutely, if there is that force, fraud, coercion, and there is credible allegations and evidence that there's another individual that participated in the sexual assault, they too can and should be charged.
So, the definition of these freak offs usually means that it involves some sort of sex worker or escort, and that obviously is illegal no matter when that was obtained. So, I'm wondering about those people who participated. We just talked about one last week that a male escort came forward and said, "Hey, I was part of this freak off. Here's all the info I have." And he likely isn't going to be charged. So, what about the other sex workers involved? Obviously, it's illegal, but prosecutors probably want to hear their side of the story.
Yeah, when you're talking about sexual assault, the victim is not going to be charged or sexual abuse, right? So then the question is, well, what about a willing and consensual worker? So obviously, prostitution and commercial sex work is a crime. That is charged in the indictment, but it's by far and away the least serious of the charges, right? You're talking about consensual sexual activity where there's some commercial component, basically a payment for sex. We know that's prostitution. Obviously, if there's a state line or federal component, it can be charged by the feds, which it has been. But I would be very surprised if all the sex workers were charged in some sort of indictment because, again, you're going to be talking about lots of individuals, really going to muddy up the case unnecessarily. Now, what separates prostitution and commercial sex from trafficking, of course, is that additional element of force, fraud, coercion, something that makes it non consensual. We know that Diddy's argument here is that this is all consensual. Now, if that's true, and I'm not saying it is, then really most of the charges go away except for the prostitution related charges. So I think individuals that were involved in the sex trafficking could potentially be charged. I think it's very unlikely that the commercial sex workers just involved in prostitution are prosecuted.
So we've hypothesized a bit about who potentially could be charged down the line or who is speaking with investigators. But what about the people who we haven't talked about, the people whose names we're unclear about, the other celebrities? What would that look like? I mean, obviously, Diddy is a huge name. That's why we're talking about him because he was this mega celebrity before this major fall from grace. So, what about these other potential celebrities whose names we don't know now, but could later be revealed?
Sierra, I'm just waiting for that shoe to drop, and it's going to be a big one. Again, lots of rumors here in Hollywood. I don't want to, perpetuate unsubstantiated rumors, but I mean, you can just think about the names or look up the names that are just being floated out there. And we're talking about celebrities that may be even bigger than Diddy, if you believe some of these reports. And you can probably count on, two hands the number of people that may be. We're talking about one of the biggest entertainers, certainly of my lifetime, certainly in the music space. So there's individuals, whether it's politics or movies or musicians, that were involved in these freak offs, and there's actually video evidence of them. I wouldn't be surprised if we start hearing more allegations and potentially more charges soon.
The video evidence, that is really the big win for the prosecution that they allegedly collected. Lil Rod said there were hundreds of hours of it. So, what would it take on these videos for prosecutors to move forward with charges? What would they have to show that other people were involved in this illegal activity?
So the video would show some sort of sex act, obviously, right? If you're believing that these are pornographic videos, and that's what Cassie and others who have come forward have alleged. So the videos show the acts, but then you obviously you need something more, right? You would need testimony from the worker or some sort of financial transaction to make it prostitution, and of course, force, fraud, coercion, right? You need victims who are going to come forward and say, "I participated in this act because I was forced." Now, if that force or coercion is shown in the video, then you have a very strong case. If not, you're going to need to corroborate the video that shows the acts with the victims or the witnesses' testimony, arguing or proving that it was coerced.
We've talked a lot about the potential for sexual assault charges, but there's also major allegations about illegal firearms or illegal drugs. Are these any charges that potentially future defendants could face?
Potentially, yes. I mean, we've seen the allegations of firearms in Diddy's Miami home with obliterated serial numbers. That's important, and that's charged routinely by the feds. I mean, One of the second person who tried to assassinate Donald Trump, those were the original charges he faced before he was charged with the attempted assassination. So the feds do prosecute those cases routinely, obviously drug cases as well. I cut my teeth as a drug prosecutor when I was the U.S. Attorney's Office. So certainly possible. We may see additional charges. Now, sometimes there's some venue issues. If some of the crimes happened in Los Angeles, it might have to be prosecuted here in my hometown or Miami or elsewhere. But there's no reason that Diddy might not face charges in multiple jurisdictions. Again, if prosecutors do decide to move forward with additional charges.
These allegations against Diddy date back to the 90s, so 30 some odd years that Diddy was allegedly sexually assaulting dozens of people potentially. Now, prosecutors have come out and said, hey, anyone with more information, please come forward. So if that does happen and someone who hasn't spoken up yet comes forward and has more information, do you think that will aid in the case?
Potentially, yes. Now, obviously, we're talking about some statute of limitations issues. Sex trafficking currently doesn't have a statute of limitations, I believe, but that was a change that was made recently, so it can't go retroactive. So, you got to look at what falls within the statute of limitations that can be charged. RICO lets you go back a little bit further. I use RICO predicate acts that might fall outside of the statute of limitations within a 10-year window. Now, sometimes judges will also allow what we call prior bad acts evidence. That's 404B evidence. That's evidence that can't be charged or isn't charged, but does show a pattern, right? And of course, in Diddy's case, it would be a pattern of physical and sexual violence. So it's up to the discretion of the trial judge, but you may see some of these older allegations come into trial, even though they're not actually charged as prior bad acts.
This next question is just speculation, but you're the former federal prosecutor, so I guess I'll ask. Do you have any hypotheses for how long this would take? Any sort of timetable for other people to maybe be charged?
There's a lot of smoke out there, Sierra, and I'm really surprised at how slow this case is moving. I mean, we talked about Cassie and her bombshell lawsuit was filed in November. The raids happened in March. The video of the beating in the Los Angeles hotel that was released by CNN in May, and now we're talking about 6 months later, and really one charge, one victim. I mean, I would expect there to be more, but given how slow this case has progressed, I don't think it's on your typical timeline. I think prosecutors have been very, very cautious. They know that Diddy's going to challenge and fight everything. So, you know, as far as new charges, it may take longer than I would typically expect in a case.
A statement from his legal team reads, quote, Sean Diddy Combs is a music icon, self-made entrepreneur, loving family man, and proven philanthropist who has spent the last 30 years building an empire, adoring his children, and working to uplift the Black community. He is an imperfect person, but is not criminal. To his credit, Mr. Combs has been nothing but cooperative with this investigation. Please reserve your judgment until you have all the facts. These are the acts of an innocent man with nothing to hide, and he looks forward to clearing his name in court. For now, Diddy is being held at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn and is expected back in court on October 9th. For Law&Crime, I'm Sierra Gillespie.